So part of my presentation has already been covered, so I'll be skipping over a few things. So if there's a little bit of a pause every once in a while, it's just to try and get myself caught up to where I was. The Seeds of Change project, which was actually started in London in 2011, it was started by 3 organizations who came together because of people's stories such as the ones we've been hearing throughout the afternoon. So the Seeds of Change project was started because of 3 different organizations or committees coming together. So Networking for Inclusive Community, which is an organization made up of a variety of representatives from different organizations in London, helping with the networking and education of services who work with refugees and immigrants. The LIP, the Local Immigration Partnership, and also a committee that's no longer, it's actually been absorbed by the Seeds of Change project, which was called the War Trauma Group. And the Seeds of Change project has come to, is focusing on refugees and immigrants around mental health, mental illness, and addictions. And sometimes, when we get into language, sometimes people call mental health mental illness, or mental illness mental health, and sometimes addictions is separated out, or sometimes it's incorporated into those mental health or illness. So we've kept it separate to this point, just to make sure that it is covered in our work. Because of the stories that all 3 committees had been hearing from refugees and immigrants around mental illness, mental health, addictions, we wanted to come together and try to create better support, both informal support and formal support. And informal support means coming from within your own community, whether it's within your own neighborhood, within your ethno-cultural group, and formal supports were more through the service providers. So those range from ESL teachers, settlement workers, faith leaders, and then the mental health and addiction service providers. You can probably move it on. So the project has been focused on 3 different phases, and the first phase and part of the second phase were completed, and then we ran out of funding. So we've had a bit of a gap, but we've been able to start up again after a 1.5 years of looking for funding. The first phase was not only looking at common vocabulary, but it was also just trying to do some capacity building within our community. We consulted with over 300 people, including refugees and immigrants and service providers. We had over 30 organizations that we consulted with to find out what the issues were that they were dealing with, what the barriers were, and what their suggestions were, because it's all about improving. It's not just about dwelling on the problems. So with those consultations, the first phase focused on the informal supports, and because some of the different cultures have different ways of looking at mental health or mental illness, or not even looking at them, not having words for the different diagnoses related to them, we came up with some pamphlet, and I brought a sample booklet here that we came up with, developed through conversation circles that we had with refugees and immigrants and those service providers that I mentioned. And the content, the design, everything was basically grassroots in terms of how it was developed. And so the pamphlet and the booklet were developed in English, and we've just in the process of getting them translated into French, Spanish, and Arabic, and we'll be making those available hopefully later fall. And then the next phase was looking at what did the ESL teachers, settlement workers, and faith leaders need in terms of helping them when someone comes to them with a problem related to mental illness, or comes to them with signs of mental illness but haven't addressed it. So that's the next part of the project that we're working on along with resources for the actual mental health and addiction workers. And a lot of the findings have already been shared by the previous 2 presenters. We've also found that in terms of trust is a big issue, language is a big issue, cultural sensitivity. There's also an issue just in terms of the engagement. Oftentimes our mental health services and addiction services, they may advertise or they may not. It's through word of mouth if people know about them. and just the understanding about what is out there and what can be offered. And the services need to look at the engagement of ethnocultural communities, and also building the trust, and as was already mentioned by Heather, making sure that we have great hiring practices and things like that. It's often said that there is no health without mental health, and that's why the focus of the Seeds of Change project is to try to create a better environment so that people who are experiencing difficulties in that area have some support and know where to get it if they do identify as having problems. We've been very fortunate in terms of our funding, even though there was a 1.5-year gap there, that we've had funding from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, the Ministry of Health, Promotion and Sport, that was the name of it at that point in time, the United Way, and the London Health Sciences Foundation through the RBC money. The project is under the umbrella of the Family Services of Thames Valley here in London, and Louise Petrie, who's the Executive Director, is a co-chair along with me. The model of the project is really focused on capacity building, and that's through from how we gather the information to how we actually develop the finished product. And that's by mixing people at the table so that we have people from different cultures sitting together and also service providers mixed in. And we've had great feedback from day one with the project that that was one of the best things that could have happened, because people can learn about each other and their organizations. Some of the key learnings that we've had have already been covered. There's a lot of issues around stigma. Primary points of contact have included settlement workers, family physicians, religious centers, ESL teachers, and we've also found that one of the most common requests was if there was continued, or if organizations were looking at offering support groups or things like that, that people preferred to actually meet with other cultures, not within their own culture. And I think some of that has to do with trust and safety and privacy and things like that. With regards to language barrier, that's one of the things that we've learned. It's when people are talking about emotions, tend to want to speak through your first language, and that needs to be looked at in terms of interpreters and in terms of who's working with them. Yeah, it's fine. It's good. So the next stage in terms of what we're looking at is to develop resources for the service providers that we talked about. And one of the things that has been interesting in terms of our findings has been that there are actually some of the issues that have been addressed or have been presented to us that we need to address are actually common to people who have been born in Canada too. So there's a little bit of normalcy around it, and there's also, it creates a bigger picture for service providers to look at and in terms of their services and engagement within the communities. So the last phase, you can flip on to the next one. So some of the things that that we ask of you, of our community, is just around our next steps. So currently our two coordinators are Fatmata and Michaela, who are both sitting there, who can wave. And they'll be working on the next two phases and looking at developing the materials. They're developing a reference group for consultation in terms of the different ideas and resources that are being developed. Also looking at supporting our networking activity, and there'll be some events that will be advertised for you to attend in the future, in the next half year, hopefully. And then we're also looking at with these materials, we'll be distributing them through the actual services that work with refugees and immigrants. So I think that's about it. Thank you.